Hello and happy Friday. I'm Alex Cox, here for your latest instalment of Fridays Live with Find My Past, and it is very good to be back. Feels like quite a while since I've spoken. I was going to say see you all. Can't technically see you all, but we're having a chat, aren't we? Anyway, but yeah, lovely to see you all. Thank you very much for tuning in. I can see there's a good number of people watching already, which is rather impressive given the fact that, oh, have I got the date wrong, Andrew Alston saying? Perhaps I have. Sorry if I have. Yeah, no, it's impressive to see quite a few of you here, particularly given that the weather is improving, and in the UK at least, the pubs have reopened, and it is Friday afternoon. So grateful to see you all. Hello to Andrew, Paul, Rosie, Linda, Patricia, Claire, Sharon in Australia. Well, I think you're going to like this week's record, Sharon. We've got a bit of a treat for you in store. Georgia in Essex, Ellen in Roscoe, Illinois, Lynn Marie in Colorado, Angela Hitchcock, June, Sue, Janet. Hello, everybody. Very lovely to see you all, and happy Friday. What are we talking about today? Well, as usual, I've probably bitten off a little more than I can chew, so we're going to see. I do like to talk, but we only have an hour through in which to get through this. Thanks to everybody saying hi. I can see you all coming in. Given that I've been quite ambitious today, there's quite a lot I want to get through. Not only the brilliant new records we've released this week, of course it's Friday, which means Find My Past Friday, brand new records, the same every week. This week we've got a pretty large update. We've got new records from Australia, the UK, a whole host of new newspapers, but a really powerful new collection for those of you who have ancestors who perhaps sailed to, spent time in, sailed from, or even settled in Australia. So we'll be taking a little look at those as we have this new collection of Australian passenger list records. I thought we could take a little quick look at traveling ancestors, tips to search for them, and the resources that you already have available. Then, depending on how we do for time, I thought I'd share some fascinating research. It was recently covered on our sorry, it does appear that I got the date wrong. Sorry about that. I do need to check my calendar. It's been a long week. Thank God it's Friday. A little look at some of the fascinating research that's been unearthed by our colleagues and chums over at the British Newspaper Archive. If you haven't checked out the British Newspaper Archive before, I urge you to, if you're a lover of history, which I assume you all are, because it's just packed with fantastic stories and insights pulled from the newspapers. We love our newspapers. We do like to call them an archive of everything. I certainly think that's a pretty good description because it genuinely is an archive of everything. And they've recently been looking at crime and punishment. And my colleague Rose wrote a fascinating post on what newspapers reveal about the experiences of convicts in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. So depending on how we get on for time, we will have a look at that. So to anybody who's tuning in for the first time, I hope there's some of you. I can see there's plenty of familiar faces and friends. It's lovely to see you all. But if you are tuning in for the first time, just to explain, we do these every single week. It's an opportunity for us to share what's going on at Find My Past, things we discovered, things we found interesting, but also talk to you. So if you have any questions, if you want to know anything, pop them in the comments. If I spot them, I will do my best to answer them live. I also have my colleague Niall manning the comments, so he can address any burning questions you may have. But also, we've got a great community of rather experienced and very helpful researchers watching right now. So if you are just dipping your toes into the waters of family history research, this is a great place to come to ask questions and find out more, because I'm sure if someone in the comments can help, they will jump at the chance to do so. So don't be shy. Say hello. I thought we'd also start. Actually, yeah. I'm jumping ahead of myself here. In the interest of fostering discussion, because that again is one of the reasons we're here, not just for me to talk to you, but for you to talk to each other. We always like to start these with a bit of a question of the week. These are just general talking points that we can all share our thoughts and feelings on. And our first question of the week, which is very much related to Miko's recent appearance on the History Hit podcast. I don't know if any of you had the chance to listen in yet, but it was fascinating. He joined celebrity historian, popular historian, Dan Snow. For those of you watching in the US who might not be aware of Dan Snow is a popular historian who's presented loads of fascinating documentaries over the years on all manner of historical subjects. He hosts a popular podcast called History Hit, which is very, very enjoyable. Doesn't just cover British history, covers global history, even ancient history. And he joined Miko. He was joined recently by Miko, who gave him his very own "Who Do You Think You Are" experience. And he made some remarkable finds. And that led me to ask this question. What talents, traits, attributes, or interests do you think you may have inherited from your ancestors? Have you ever spotted anything in the records that's made you think, wow, that's just like me? Because that was certainly the case for Dan Snow. I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. I don't want to give too much away because I'd encourage you to actually listen to the podcast because it's very, very enjoyable. But yeah, I'm sure many of us, I think it's quite a common thing. You spot a story in the records, you think, well, that sounds remarkably familiar. I know the case is true for me. You know, I've talked about them many times before, but all my kind of performing ancestors who did a bit of vaudeville, a bit of Punch and Judy, was a concert pianist, a ventriloquist. And I like to think that's where I get my, I'm trying to think of a polite way of saying it. I like to talk and I like to be listened to. So I think that's where I may have got that from. A little bit of showmanship perhaps running in the genes. I attempt to play a few instruments, though I'm nowhere near as accomplished as my ancestors. But I like to think my appreciation for music and all things musical comes from that. But yeah, if you think you've discovered anything similar, pop it in the comments. Just pop that QOTW to start off with, so I can spot them easily, and I'll read some of them out. Just see, we've already had some through. So Andrew Alston said, I'm told that I inherited my skill in poorly cleaning metalwork, such as brass, from my paternal grandfather, who died before I was born. Concentrate on the corners, which everybody else ignores. That's fantastic advice. If I'm ever polishing some brass, I will be sure to take that, Andrew. Thank you for sharing. Amanda has said, I'm very passionate about history. Great, I can combine family history with history. Made me even more passionate about history, if that is possible. I'm sure it could be, perhaps. Paul Richard Ryan has said art and also writing. Jeff Tarty has said an attribute. So yeah, not just talents, tastes, or opinions, but red hair. As red as hair as Prince Harry, but now almost all grey, white, blonde. And I think that's quite rare nowadays. That's something that is dying out rapidly. So lovely thing to inherit. I personally like red hair. You're an orator. Any politicians in your past? It's funny you should say that. There actually is. Yes, my great uncle with the fantastic name Sir Skews Cox was MP for Richmond upon Thames, which, funny enough, I live down the road from now. Maybe that comes from there as well. But yeah, so that's question of the week. Keep them coming. I will be keeping an eye out for them. But also, as it's Friday, I thought we'd do something a little bit fun. I love historical anniversaries, and today is a day with a load of interesting ones. So I thought we'd do a bit of an on this day quiz. No cheating now, no Googling. You can this has got to be on the top of your head. I've got no way of telling, but I trust you all. I trust you all deeply. So I've got 6 questions related to anniversaries that happened on this day. Niall, who's watching in the comments, I think it's going to be a bit of a fingers first thing. I think Niall can keep an eye out on who gets the correct answer first. So I might space them out across the broadcast, but I'm going to start off with one that is an anniversary I wanted to talk a little bit about, actually, because it's probably the most significant of the bunch. So get ready for our On This Day quiz. It is Friday afternoon. I wouldn't judge you if you had a drink in your hand. You could pretend you're in the pub and doing a pub quiz. It's going to be a bit shorter, probably a little bit easier as well, actually. But we'll start off with question 1, which is, which famous maritime disaster occurred on this day in 1915? This may be quite an easy one. Which famous maritime disaster occurred on this day in 1915? You get a bonus point if you're able to also add a note in on why it's such a historically significant maritime disaster. We all know about the Titanic. It's not the Titanic, but this event sent shockwaves that affected global history. So let's have a look and see. I think Linda Devi got there first. Yes, it was the sinking of the Lusitania, which happened today, 7th of May, 1915. And as I said, this was an incredibly significant event for a number of reasons, not just because of the tragic loss of life. I can see quite a few people actually have got the correct answer. Congratulations to Andrew, June, Rita, Janet. You're all clever clogs. Sarah as well. So yeah, this was a hugely significant event. Of course, the Lusitania was a British ocean liner sunk by a German U-boat today, May 7th, 1915. And the reason it was such, yeah, Rita was torpedoed by the Germans. But the answer I was actually looking for, the reason it was so historically significant was because it contributed indirectly, maybe some would even argue directly, to the United States entering World War I, which I think was the final nail in the coffin for the Germans and their allies. It signified the beginning of the end of we call it the Great War. There was not that much great about it, I can say that. But yeah, it's a tragic story. If you are interested, I recommend having a search in our newspapers. There is a lot in there on the sinking of the Lusitania. It was a very well-known ship. It was launched on June the 7th, 1906. Its liner service was up and running the following year, and at the time, it was the largest ship in the world. I can see one or two people did mention the Mauritania, which was its sister ship, and actually overtook it in size a couple of years later. But it was huge. It measured about 780 odd feet. That's roughly 240 meters in length. Big old ship weighing over 31,000 tons. And on September the 7th, 1907, it made its maiden voyage from Liverpool to New York, which was actually an incredibly common route. In fact, a couple of years back, we did some analysis of our collection of outbound passenger lists. We wrote a fascinating, well, in my opinion, it was fascinating, maybe because I wrote it, but a blog post about all the insights that allowed us to tell from these records. I'm sure Niall can pop a link in the comment with a great infographic showing the incredible amount of ocean-bound traffic between New York and Liverpool. And so yeah, maiden voyage. Following year, we're on the Blue Ribbon, not the biscuit. That was the award awarded to the ship that made the fastest transatlantic crossing, which the Lusitania did, averaging nearly 24 knots. Mauritania later nicked that from its sister ship. But let's talk about the tragic sinking. So in May 1915, it was returning from New York back to Liverpool with 1,959 souls on board. And at this time, the sinking of merchant ships, particularly off the south coast of Ireland, was known to the Admiralty. Submarine activity in that area was very high. The British Admiralty did try and warn the Lusitania to avoid that area and recommended adopting an evasive zigzag kind of maneuver, changing course every few minutes. The ship's captain, William Thomas Turner, a very fateful decision, sadly chose to ignore those recommendations. And on the afternoon of May the 7th, the vessel was hit by a torpedo and exploded amidships on the starboard side. A heavier explosion followed, probably caused by damage caused to the engines and pipes. And within 20 minutes, terrifying, within 20 short minutes, the ship had sunk, killing 1,198 people on board. Truly, truly tragic. The loss of the liner and many of its passengers, including 128 United States citizens, aroused a significant wave of indignation across the United States, which had kind of been on the fence about getting involved in the war. And it was fully expected by the Allies that a declaration of war would soon follow. But the US government did cling to its policy of neutrality for a period of time. That did change eventually, and it is viewed as, it's incredibly sad, yeah. It is viewed as one of the contributing factors for the United States joining. Controversially, though, the Lusitania was actually carrying not just people, but it was also carrying rifle ammunition and shells. About 173 tons of munitions, actually, and the Germans had circulated warnings that the ship would be sunk, actually felt themselves justified in attacking it because they argued it was furthering the war aims of their enemy. That didn't go down particularly well with the rest of the world. On May the 13th, literally a week after, the US government sent a note to Berlin expressing their indignation. And the note was, but I was going to say I'm beating around the bush here. Basically, by 1917, the United States did cite German submarine warfare as a justification for their entry into the First World War. So there you go. That was today's anniversary. I'm realizing I'm already going through time rather quickly. Let's do another quick question. Another quick question. So, ready for question number 2. This one's a bit of a more positive anniversary. So, on May the 7th in 1946, which major Japanese company was founded by Ibuku Masaru and Morita Akio? So, on this day in 1946, which major Japanese company was founded? And I'll give you a clue. It's a company that's still going today, and I'd be amazed if most of you didn't have some of their products currently sat in your home. So while I give you the opportunity to answer that, I'm going to have a quick look. We've got some more questions of the week. Sue has said, question of the week, gardening, farming, strong faith, interested in traveling to new places to learn more, to benefit from my family. I love exploring cemeteries and family history. Also, I have a plant that was a piece of my great-grandmother's crown of thorn. Oh, wow. She had her shaped into an actual crown and would put it on her porch around Easter when the first flowers popped out, resembling the blood on the brow of Christ. I did not inherit her skill in shaping it there. That's a lovely heirloom to have in your family. Thank you very much for sharing, Sue. Janet said, question of the week, singing. Mainly amateur in choirs, distant cousins sang with touring companies of the D'Orly Cart Opera Company. Apologies if I butchered the pronunciations. We all know it's not my strong point. And congratulations to Jeff Doherty, who got in there first. Yes, on this day in 1946, the Sony Corporation was founded and is still going strong. I can see quite a few people got that. Daphne, Ellen, Linda, among others. But yeah, Jeff got there first. Congratulations, Jeff. Do you know what? We're going to do one more question before I really do need to start talking about this week's records. Otherwise, we're going to be here all evening. And it is Friday, so I'm sure you have better things to be doing than listen to me waffle on about anniversaries. This one's a fun one, actually. This one's a fun one. So, the Theatre Royal, built by the dramatist Thomas Killigrew for his company of actors, opened in London on this day in 1663. What is it now most commonly known as? So the Theatre Royal, built by the dramatist Thomas Killigrew for his company of actors, opened in London on this day in 1663. What is it most commonly known as? And you get a bonus point if you're able to say what it's most commonly known for. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to answer that. Beverly Eamon, question of the week, 4 generations of talent in art. Well, the reason I asked that question of the week, that's what I was going to say, was if you haven't listened to the Dan Snow podcast, one of the most amazing things Miko did discover was that Dan may have actually inherited his love of interest from his 10 times great-grandfather, a chap with a rather fantastic name, a chap by the name of Sir Simond Hughes. So Miko was able to, testament to Rico's incredible skills as a researcher. He was able to trace Dan's family tree all the way back to the Tudor era. He discovered all sorts of things, some of which had already been discovered. The fact that Dan Snow's great-grandfather, I believe, was General Snow, who commanded, who was one of the commanders of the Somme. But, through newspapers, we were able to add all kinds of colour and insight into the man's personality, basically showing that he was actually quite far removed from the classic portrayal you see of the World War I officer class, that they were callous, cold and uncaring. In fact, General Snow was far from it. Newspaper reports showed that he cared deeply for his men. He was the first to introduce divisional baths for his division, which was at the 7th Corps. His division was also the first to establish its own performance troupe called the Follies, which really kind of painted this picture of a man who wasn't cold and detached, miles away from a desk. He was a man who cared about the well-being of his men, as much as he was able to during such a terrible conflict. And also, the report showed that he wasn't miles away from behind his desk. He was there with his troops and was wounded terribly at the Battle of the Marne. He suffered a fractured pelvis. Not from an explosion or a gunshot, he actually fell from his horse, but still a combat injury, one that was actually forced him to spend the most of his remaining years wheelchair bound. So he did not escape unscathed. So, challenges the assumptions we have about a lot of those World War One officers. General Snow cared about his men and was with them and suffered alongside them. Miko found loads of other stuff, including an MP ancestor with a penchant, you could say, is that the way you pronounce it, or a taste for expensive shoes, something Dan said he didn't inherit. Found a will for this chap, John Hadley O'Deily, who lost all of his fortune in a failed business venture with his family, sailed to India, reclaimed it all, and left a will, a substantial will, which provided, quite a lot of insight about his tastes. Expensive shoes, book bindings. He had an outstanding bill for both that he left, along with a sizable estate for his ancestors to pay off for him. But the most interesting thing, as I said, was that Sir Symonds D'Ewes was an antiquarian and a collector of historical manuscripts of note, which is quite incredible when you think his 10 times grandson is one of the better known popular historians in the UK. Sir Symonds didn't ever quite reach the same level of fame and success as his famous descendant, but he actually made an incredible contribution to British history. He had this remarkable collection of manuscripts, which about 50 years after his death was purchased by a chap called Robert Harley in 1704. And if you recognise that name, that's for good reason. That's because the Harleian collection, of which Sir Symonds' books made up the majority, actually became one of the founding principal collections of the British Library. So there you go. Dan Snow's 10 times great-grandfather was not only a historian, not only a lover of all things related to the past, but also one of the men who helped establish an institution we all use today, particularly if you're researching our historical newspapers, the cultural icon that is the British Library. There was loads more interesting things revealed, but I think I'm going to have to leave it for now, given that I'm already 23 minutes in and I haven't even got to this week's records. But if you want to know more, visit History Hit, read the listen to the podcast. It's very interesting. And going back to the question, the winner is, I believe it is Andrew Alston. You're right. It's now known as the Drury Lane Theatre. So, Theatre Royal opened in 1663, now known as Drury Lane. But the thing it's also known for, this is where you got the bonus point, the oldest English theatre that is still in use. So thank you to Sir Thomas Killigrew. I've never actually been to Drury Lane. It's on my bucket list. Something I'm going to be doing in the not too distant future, when the world returns back to normal, I think. Amanda said, what an amazing ancestor Dan Snow has. I couldn't agree more. And I think testament to Miko's ability to be able to get all the way back to the Tudor era. Another question of the week, a stubbornness to Tracy Bedford. Oh, this is a good one. Question of the week, stubbornness to carry on even when bad things happen. Like my great-grandmother who lost a husband in World War I, remarried, lost 4 children and a second husband by 1936. Wow, then lost 2 more children during World War II. Poor woman. Wow, that is incredible. Yeah, strength of character indeed to carry on. Many people would not be able to. Passed it down to me, inherited from her first husband, my great-granddad, and the shortness in height. So yeah, wow, thank you, Tracy. That's I particularly like that comment as well, because it reminds me that I think quite a lot of people have taken great comfort in the stories of their ancestors during lockdown. I certainly have. It's been a rough year for many people for a variety of reasons. And one of the things I have felt is that, if my great-grandfather Leslie was able to make it through the Battle of the Somme at the age of 17, surely I can cope with being stuck indoors for a couple of months. It's been a real comfort to me, and I'm sure it has been to many others. Victoria Whitewell, question of the week. My passion for languages must be inherited from my third great-grandfather, who was a professor of French and Spanish, and also a publisher of the book The French Teacher. His talents certainly skip my generations, as I've not found any other linguists. That's a skill I wish. I don't know if any of my ancestors were bilingual, actually, but I'm certainly not. My wife is. It's something I wish I was. Right, I think in the interest of time, I'm going to have to start looking at this week's records, which isn't a bad thing. They're very, very good this week. Actually, before we do, sorry, I'm enjoying the quiz. Before we progress, I'm going to ask one more question. I think this may be the trickiest one on the list. So on this day, another positive anniversary, on this day in 1945, a German delegation that included General Alfred Jodl went to sign the surrender documents that ended the European phase of World War II. Where did this take place? You can answer in a variety of ways. You can tell me the location in France, the name of the place in France that this happened, or you can tell me the name of the general whose headquarters received General Jodl and his colleagues to accept the formal surrender. So just to recap, on this day in 1945, a German delegation that included General Alfred Jodl went to sign. I wonder if he was good at yodeling. That's a terrible joke. I shouldn't have made it. I apologize. Went to sign the surrender documents that ended the European phase of World War II. Where did this take place? You can say the location or the name of the general's headquarters where these documents were signed, and all will be revealed after we. Actually, you're so fast. June got there straight away. You're right. It was Reims. It took place in Reims. Very, very well done. That was very quick off the mark. The bonus point would have been, you could have said it took place in General Dwight D. Eisenhower's headquarters in Reims. So that was a tricky one. Well done to June. Well done to Tracy as well, who got the answer. Who both got the answer. That was a tricky one. Without further ado, I think it's time to look at this week's records. What am I like? I always bite off far more than I can chew. So today is Find My Past Friday, and as I said, we've released millions of new records. Niall, I'm sure, can post a link to the blog post if you want to find out more. Chief among them this week is our new collection of Australia inward, outward, and coastal passenger lists spanning the years 1826 and 1972. But I think as that's the highlight this week, I will save that till last. So these Australian passenger lists are not the only collection we've published. If you've got Middlesex ancestors, we've also published a new collection of Paul Orr records. Very rich collection spanning 1699 to 1846, so going all the way back to the very end of the 17th century. Paul Orr records are fascinating, given the significant percentage of the population that fell on hard times and required Paul Orr assistance at some point during history. If you have Middlesex ancestors, you may well find them in here. Covers 10 parishes. You'll find the full list in the blog post that Niall's kindly linked to. And you'll find a wide variety of documents in here, everything from settlement examinations to bastardy bonds. And most of them are packed with rich family details, so not one to miss. Next up is our update to our Devon Parish record collection. We are incredibly proud of our collection of Devon Parish records. Devon is a fascinating county with a real history of migration, actually. There was a bit of a Devon diaspora, you could say. Lots of people who worked in the mining trade, who worked in the fishing and agricultural industries in Devon, set sail and put down roots in the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, even South Africa, places like that. So I'm sure many of you watching in the US, Australia, Canada may well have Devon roots. And if you do, our Devon Parish collection is something you do want to check on. Sorry. It's exclusive to us. Most of these records are records you will not find anywhere else. They date all the way back to 1538, so big old stretch of history there. And I can't talk about this collection without giving a massive thanks to our friends and partners at the Devon Family History Society. We value our partnership with Devon and all the other family history societies we work with incredibly. It allows us to publish millions of new records online that you could only find with us and probably wouldn't see the light of day if it wasn't for the hard work of society volunteers who spend countless hours painstakingly transcribing not only parish records but all kinds of historical documents, as well as gravestones, monumental inscriptions. Family history societies play a very, very important role in UK family history. So do support them. And if you're struggling with family history research in a specific county, again, one of the things I will recommend is reaching out to your local family history society. Devon, as do many others, offer help desk services, so you can check in with them and they may answer any questions you may have. I know that, like Findmypast, they've seen a massive surge in interest since lockdown. It does seem that lockdown restrictions have got the public researching, which is great. I think the more people that are researching their roots, the better. It makes things better for all of us. More connections, more research to benefit from. Yeah, a bigger family history community is a healthier family history community. So yeah, support your local family history society. Get in touch, ask them any questions you may have. And as well as all the Devon records, the Middlesex Poor Law records, we've added loads of new newspapers, far too many for me to read out. You will find them listed in the blog. 15 brand new titles, and we've added a load of new pages to 25 existing publications. So there is a lot to sink your teeth into this weekend, all you newspaper fans. Actually, I wasn't going to list all the newspapers, but there is one in there that I find particularly interesting, which is it's a brand new title called Cycling. It was first published, I think the title gives it away, Cycling. It was all about anything cycling related. First published on the 24th of January 1891, costing just 1 penny, inflation. The first edition consisted of over 17 pages, which were devoted entirely to this relatively new, but at the time immensely popular sport. If any of you are cycling enthusiasts, this is a must read because it's so charming and a really detailed, rich, lovely look at the history of a hobby that was still back then in its infancy, but was rapidly attracting many devoted followers. It offered its readers, and I quote, 20 pages of reading, 50 pages of trade announcements. So lots of ads in there, many, but those are fascinating as well if you're interested in the history of cycling, because a lot of those ads were full-page adverts for the latest bicycles and other cycling equipment. So you can see the evolution of the technology that was being used, and it was new technology at the time. I won't go into too much more detail, but I think the best way to describe it is the prologue written by its editor, a chap by the name of Charles P. Sisley. There's also loads of beautiful illustrations in there by two chaps called George Moore and Percy Camp, alongside a load of other artists. But basically, Charles P. Sisley laid out its remit in one of the early issues, saying, by way of prologue, cycling has mapped out for itself an ambitious program. It appears to cycle riders in every corner of the wide world as the first wheeled journal to fully illustrate the history of the sport, pastime, and trade week by week. Its intention is to treat every topic from an impartial standpoint, to criticize fairly but without acrimony. In a word, its motto is news without abuse. And I think that motto, news without abuse, is a motto that many news outlets could adopt nowadays. Judith saying, how do you access these journals on cycling etc online? Well, they're available in Findmypast's newspaper collection. I'm afraid if you do want to access, you do have to have a pro subscription. Alternatively, you could visit our sister site, the British Newspaper Archive. British Newspaper Archive and Findmypast hold pretty much exactly the same newspaper collections. The only difference is the search experience. The newspaper archive is tailored a little bit more to searching newspapers specifically, but all the same titles you can explore with a pro subscription on Findmypast, or I believe it's called an Ultimate if you're watching in the United States. I checked them out. They're worth it. Judith the Sage, your Devon records are amazing. Thank you very much. Again, Judith, 2 comments in a row. Susan also echoing that. Great to see the Devon records. Lots of family in there. And Andrew's saying, agree with the local FHS suggestion. I volunteer at our local research centre when possible, being closed because of COVID. Sorry to hear that, Andrew. We've been speaking to a number of family history societies around the country at the moment. We're hoping to really work more closely with them because we rely so heavily on their records. We just want to join forces a little bit more. And quite a few of them have actually adapted, a bit like our Findmypast from Home programme. A lot of them have gone virtual, and that has opened up access to people all over the world. So if you are watching in the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, you can reach out to family history societies in the UK. You can join their Zoom lectures. You can reach out to them. You don't have to physically go in and visit. So opening of access. I think lots of innovative adaptations have been made since COVID, and they're always good to see. Amanda said, a friend of mine is a keen cyclist. I discovered his great-grandfather was also. Discovered an article where his ancestors cycled through Europe. He was thrilled with that. I bet he was. Well, you should search for him in cycling. He may well be in there. Do you know what? I'm talking so quickly, I nearly forgot the main record set this week that I wanted to talk about. Drum roll. Dun, 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 dun. This is our Australia. Well, I don't know why drum roll. I've already mentioned it. Our Australia inward, outward, and coastal passenger list, 1826 to 1972. So if you had an ancestor who travelled to, from, or even just around Australia, you may discover their details, well, the details of their voyage in this big collection. What we've done here is we've basically taken all our existing collections of Australian passenger lists. There was a lot, you've got national passenger lists for 1898 to 1972, New South Wales passenger lists, Queensland customs and shipping passengers and crew, South Australia passenger lists, Tasmania departures, Victoria inward and outward and coastal passenger lists. We've combined all those into one simple search, and we've added an additional 9 million new records. So if you've got ancestors who sailed to or from or around Australia, this is probably the collection you want to be trying. There's now 26 million records in there from multiple sources covering all corners of the country, as I've said, spanning from 1826 to 1972. Obviously, every single record has a transcript, otherwise how would you search them? But many will also include an image of the original record itself. It's quite hard to say exactly what you'll find because passenger lists do vary pretty significantly in their size, length, the level of detail they recorded, because generally there wasn't any standardized format. It depended on where they were being recorded and who was recording them. So I've just seen Claire is saying, I hope to find my family ancestors traveling to Australia and from. Well, check out this collection. Niall shared the link in the comments. You can have a go, and I think you've got a good chance. And I'll give you a few tips for looking in a second as well. But going back to what the records reveal, as I said, no standardized format. It'll vary. Some will record minimal information on the passengers, while others will actually be quite detailed. The kind of things you can expect to see, though, pretty much all of them will give you dates and locations of arrival and departure, the ship's name. It may give other additional details about the ship, things like the captain's name, the tonnage of the vessel, that sort of thing. But many will also reveal quite useful biographical details, such as ages, occupations, nationalities, residences, places of birth, marital statuses. So yeah, information that can be very, very useful if you're building out your Australian family tree. So definitely worth a look. Kate has said, this sounds excellent. I'm Australian. Does this collection also include passengers traveling from the UK to South Africa? Well, Kate, this collection is literally just passengers sailing to, from, or around Australia. But what you do want to check is our collection of outbound passenger lists from the UK. These do only date from the 1890s, I'm afraid, but they do include a significant volume of journeys from the UK to South Africa. If you want to learn a little bit more, actually, about the kind of people that were sailing from South England to South Africa and the volumes, and you check out the blog post Niall did earlier in the comments, the infographic we did. We analysed this whole collection. South Africa was actually in one of the top destinations. You will find a lot of voyages sailing from the UK to South Africa in there. Sorry, I'm talking so fast. It's because I've as always, I've set a far too long list of topics for myself. But one of the things I did want to quickly mention as well was, so if you like the sound of those records, you want to give them a search, what can you do to help yourself? I should see, sorry, I love seeing all the comments. Joan felt excited to research this Australian collection as all my ancestors arrived in Australia first and on to New Zealand. Well, actually, that's a very, very good point. Thank you. I nearly forgot that, Joan. Thank you for reminding me. Yes, if your ancestors sailed to Australia, if your ancestors settled in New Zealand, there is a very good chance they sailed to Australia first. In fact, a lot of the migrants who settled in New Zealand during the New Zealand gold rushes were people who'd first sailed to Australia to make their fortune in the Australian gold rushes. Amanda Webb and Breathe. I will try to. So yeah, Joan, great. I'm sure you. Well, I hope I can't say I'm sure. I hope you will find something. And to anyone else watching with ancestors in New Zealand, that's a great point. You may find them in there as well. So if you're going to be searching these records, what are some tips? Well, it always helps to go in armed with a little bit of information already. If you've got an ancestor with an unfortunately common name like Cox, my ancestors are pretty tricky to track down. I think it's the 61st most common name in the British Isles. So it doesn't make things easy. If you already know things like ages, residences, the names of other family members, other people in their life, note that down before you start searching. That will definitely help. In terms of names, bear in mind names of immigrants were very commonly misspelled or even changed because of the difficulty in language. If they were migrating from a non-English speaking country to an English speaking country, such as the United States or Australia, they may have well changed their names. So, for example, you may find your ancestor recorded as John Black in Australia, but back in Austria or Germany, he may have been known as Johannes Schwartz. So just bear that in mind. Names are misspelt, and immigrants did often anglicize their names. So you may find these differences on either side of the Atlantic, Pacific, whatever ocean it was they crossed. Approximate ages are very, very helpful. You can work that out from birth years and a rough estimation of when they sailed. That really will help you potentially narrow the results down if you've got loads back. As I kind of briefly mentioned as well, the names of relatives, whether that's children, spouses, siblings, perhaps even parents, if they were emigrating rather than just traveling on business, it's quite possible that they traveled as a family unit or even in larger groups. Whole communities often sailed together to start new lives in what was then called the New World. So yeah, keep an eye out on the manifest. You may spot other relatives that could help you pinpoint whether this is actually your guy or girl. If you already know the name of their spouse or father or mother or children and you see them listed alongside, it's a pretty good indication that you are on the right track and this is the correct person. It doesn't just go for family members as well. If you've identified neighbours in censuses or other record sets like that, or perhaps as witnesses on marriage certificates, they may have sailed with your ancestors as well. So that is also worth bearing in mind. Friends and neighbours often travelled in groups and settled among friends from their native land, so it's always worth bearing in mind. And one you can't forget is family stories and traditions. Many family traditions are obviously, but often exaggerated. You may have had a tale that your ancestor was a stowaway when in fact that wasn't actually the case. But often they do include some grains of fact. So use them. If you've got a story or a myth or a legend that's been passed down about your immigrant ancestor, if there's any potential clues in there that you could latch onto to help narrow down your search when looking at these passenger lists, use it. It's going to help. And last but by no means least, census records. Before you check these records, it's definitely worth looking for these very same ancestors in census records of their country of origin. If they sailed from the United Kingdom, you're very fortunate. And same with the US actually. They wouldn't be sailing from the US, they'd be sailing to the US. If they emigrated from the United Kingdom, which many millions of people did, you're lucky that you'll have a lot of census records, pretty much complete censuses from 1841 up to 1911 you can use to find out ages, birthplaces, the names of other family members, all things that you can use to fill in the gaps and use additional clues when you're searching these records. So I hope that was helpful. I mean, the next trick, it's not really a trick, it's pretty obvious, is to start searching online. There are many indexes of passenger lists available, including our new Australian collection, including our outward bound passenger lists from 1890 from the UK. Actually, that almost made me forget as well. Towns of origin, worth noting as well. You'll find those in the censuses. And work with date ranges. Now, start off a little broader. mix and match with other searches, and narrow things down as you go along. That should make things a little bit easier. So yeah, there are plenty of great travel and migration passenger list collections available online. I've already mentioned our outward bound lists from 1890 to 1960. We've actually got some pretty old ones as well that we've published with the National Archives. So if your ancestors were very early settlers to the United States, you can try our collection of early emigration from Britain, 1636 to 1815 records. If your ancestor settled in colonial America, it actually covers the post-Revolutionary War as well, 1636 to 1815. They're a brilliant record collection. They include a variety of sources from the Treasury, the Exchequer, the Colonial Office, the Audit Office. I think there's others, and these are available on Findmypast. Great for finding your early immigrant ancestors. So they cover voyages to Canada, mainly after 1815 up to 1822, America and the West Indies from 1634 up to about 1761, North America and the West Indies from 1773 to 1775. So yeah, you get the picture. There's loads in there. We've also got registers of travel to Europe, New England, Barbados, and other colonies. Actually, I think what the official title is, Registers of Licenses Passed Beyond the Seas. Really interesting collection, basically very early passport applications granted for people who were given permission to leave the country from 1573 to 1677. And there's many, 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 many more. If you're wondering exactly what we've got, I think my top tip really would be to go to our A to Z of record search, filter by travel and migration. You'll get a great idea of what's there, or just try searching. That's easily the best way to find a specific resource if you've got something very specific in mind that you are looking to find. Brilliant. So I can see we've got 10 minutes left. I'm going to do one more Friday question if you're still feeling quizzical. And this is maybe the easiest one, actually. This may be the easiest one. So this is Scottish philosopher David Hume, known for his philosophical empiricism and skepticism, was born in which Scottish city on this day in 1711? I think it's, I don't know. I thought this one was probably the easiest of the bunch. Let's see. Before we have a quick look at prison reports, newspaper reports on experiences in prisons, I'm gonna have to, I don't know if I'm gonna have time to do that in full. I'm just gonna have a quick look at some comments. Lynn Marie Alex said black. Actually, going back to the Anglican, losing the ability to speak. It's been a long week. Going back to Anglicising names, black may have even been Bloch. That's another great point to remember. Sue has said, I am over our Deutsch folk genealogy group and the name translations are the norm. We have one family that has to date 19 different spellings. Very, very good example of why it's important to remain flexible. When you first start, it can be frustrating, but once you see it, you can get very creative. Learning as you go along, and I think that's the great thing about family history. You're always learning, aren't you? You never stop learning. I've been doing it for years now, probably nowhere near as long as some of the people watching, but I'm still learning. Another comment from Andrew, who said, one distant cousin claimed to be like this. One distant cousin claimed to be 21 when sailing from Hobart to Melbourne. He was actually 51. Wow, okay. So be very flexible with ages. That's another fantastic example. Christine Lomas, I'm afraid I don't know the answer to this, but maybe someone in the comments may be able to help. She said, my grandmother was born in Ballarat in 1884. How do I go about finding a birth certificate? I assume the answer would be finding them on a civil registration index and ordering the birth certificate from the relevant website. You should find all the information you need. I'm sure there'll be an index available. I've got a suggestion from Fi. Hi, Fi. Alex, can I ask if FMP can do a live about finding relatives who became orphans? Yes, actually, that is Yeah, it's a tricky subject. It's one I've been asked about quite a lot, so I'm definitely going to put that down as a suggestion. I have a feeling we'd need to go away and do a bit of our own research on that to make sure we do it justice, because it's a topic that's in incredibly high demand. And to my knowledge, there are solutions, but none of them are easy. So yeah, thank you for the suggestion. I will definitely take that on board. And in answer to the question, well done, Amanda. Yes, David Hume was born in Edinburgh on this day in 1711. So you've all the questions have been answered rather quickly. I'm very, very impressed. John Tyner's also got that right as well. Claire's just saying Ballarat is in Victoria, Australia. I'm pretty sure the Australian government have civil registration indexes. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's where you want to look. Have a look on some of the government websites. We may have collections on Findmypast. Off the top of my head, I can't say for certain though. Right, well, I think I've got 10 minutes left, and I did say I was going to do it. So if you've still got the patience to listen to my incredibly rapid speech, we'll do a very, very, very quick look at life behind bars in British prisons in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Well, the reason I wanted to talk about this is because I'm fascinated by the history of crime, prisons, and punishment. We've got an amazing collection on Findmypast, definitely worth checking. But there's also so much in the newspapers. The public, just as we are now, I think the public historically has always been interested in convicts and life on the inside. Shows like Banged Up Abroad now are very popular, but interest in this is not a modern phenomenon. People have always had an interest. So starting off, we'll take a look at two prisons, famous prisons. One of the most famous British prisons, actually, Wormwood Scrubs. Woking Female Prison is also a very famous one as well. And one of my favourite newspapers, The Sphere, reported in 1907 how Wormwood Scrubs was one of the most recently erected prisons in England. Some actually labelled it the finest specimen of penal architecture in the land. But one of the things I found really interesting was actually Linda Devy. Yeah, we do need to share all about wacky crime and punishment. We've got bags of material on that, so that's going in the suggestion hat too. Oh wow, John Turner, Wicklow Gold had its last hanging in the 1840s. Actually, that's quite early for a last hanging, isn't it? Considering people were still being hanged up into the 1950s. So yeah, the Sphere, one of the things I found interesting was the Sphere reported how the prison was actually built by the convicts itself. It was built with granite sourced from Dartmoor, built by the prisoners themselves. They built their own cells, 1,381 cells to be exact, which were enclosed by a very intimidating 18-foot high wall over 15 acres. It was opened in 1871, and it was a pretty big prison. You weren't getting out of there easily. Woking Female Prison, meanwhile, was the first ever purpose-built female convict prison in Britain. First ever built specifically just to house female inmates. It was covered in one of our other wonderfully illustrated newspapers, The Graphic, by a chap called F.W. Robertson, who produced a series of very detailed articles on life in both Woking and Wormwood Scrubs, and that's really what I wanted to talk through about. I've only got a couple of minutes, so I'll try and bring out some of the highlights. So Robinson actually visited Woking, and the population when he went was about 409 inmates, but the facility could actually hold about 700, and in points had actually been overflowing with convicts, as he described. And as with Wormwood Scrubs, Woking Female Prison had been built by the inmates of Woking Male Prison. It was only 5 acres, nowhere near as big as Wormwood Scrubs, but still pretty big. But what was life like in there? I'll do my best to summarise this in the 5 minutes we've got left, because if you want, check out the blog. Go to the British Newspaper Archive blog if you want to read more about this, because the articles by Robinson are very, very detailed and very interesting. He wrote a series of articles on life at Wormwood, and one of the things he was keen to say was it wasn't all darkness and despair. There was brightness and lightness. So he praised the architecture quite heavily, saying it was a cleverly constructed and well thought out piece of work. He wrote, this is his own words: each cell has an outlet for foul air, and its inlet for fresh warm air. The ventilation seems perfect. A cell is sometimes 10 feet in width and 13 feet in length, still pretty small. And there is plenty of breathing space for the captive. Each cell is furnished with a plank bed, a set of shelves for his Bible and Testament, his book from the prison library, and his pint tin, a fixed table and stool, a bell push to the right of the door, should there be any necessity, as in the event of illness, for the prison to summon an officer on duty in the ward. So the cells were, there's also some really great illustrations in there to show exactly what they look like. He went on to say those cells were built to this new design, arranged parallel to one another, giving in the author's opinion, a brightness and lightness not frequently met with in a convent prison at all. So there was loads of praise for the cells. I mean, the prison administrator, Major General Sir Edmund Duquesne, gave a statement and said, "All the cells have sunlight in them at some time of the day. There are no dank, dark courts and corners, as there must necessarily be on the radiating plan, and the cell windows of one block do not overlook the yard attached to another block." I'm assuming that's because they didn't want them planning anything nefarious. One of the things I found, I don't have long, so I'm going to have to wrap up. But one of the things I found really, really interesting, though, were actually reports on Woking female prison. He talks about how the inmates were kept busy making twine, even though describing it as an imposing scene in the tailor's room. But the women worked very, very industrially. But he did say some aspects of work were unsuccessfully applied. He wrote some women had been taught the art of mosaic making, but that's quite skilled, but it had been largely given up as a failure, as it was found that a woman who had been taught this trade had no opportunity, or scarcely any opportunity, of learning, actually that's true, of earning a livelihood afterward in the world. Mosaic workers being few, and old regular hands were preferred. Yeah, I mean, it could have, who knows, it could have led to a renaissance of mosaic making in the British Isles. Sadly, that was not the case. They found that, while it was a lovely pastime and mosaics are beautiful, who doesn't love a good mosaic, there wasn't high enough demand to keep these women employed. Twine making, on the other hand, was much more applicable to the outside world. Female inmates who learnt to make twine, they worked very diligently. Robinson said there was actually no conversation allowed during work hours. I would assume the prison was probably making a substantial amount of money out of this at the same time. I think a lot of prisons do make money out of prison labour to this day. But these women could at least try and work as twine makers once their term was up. But he also detailed the dress that the prisoners wore. So there was a different class of prisoner, and each class had a different style of costumes that could clearly be identified by the guards. This was very necessary for the purposes of identification, and the classes corresponded to the length of time an inmate had been in the prison, and the clothing was broken down this way. So probation class, that was first, they'd spent 9 months or more. Summer wear, it was a lilac cotton skirt with a blouse bodice, a square of serge at the shoulders, checked blue and white apron, small linen cap, with a goffered border. At third class, second 9 months. In the summer, they were given plain blue cotton skirt with stripes and a square of brown serge at the shoulders. Same white bonnet to the probation class. And in the winter, they were given a brown serge dress and a fawn-coloured cape. Second class, third 9 months, they were given a full blue cotton skirt with white spots. That's how they'd be differentiated from the others. Same blouse bodice of the same material. Also these squares of thick green serge for the shoulders. And in the winter, they wore an entire gown of green serge. First class, these were people who'd been in from 4 9-month spells. Summer and winter had very little or any distinction from the second class. Special class, these were the serious timers. These were the people who were in there for a long time. Wore a princess robe of dark grey striped flannel, a cap of crossbar muslin with a goffered border and broad muslin strings. So it gives you an idea of what they wore. But the other thing I found in there, which is the last thing I'll say on this, because I appreciate many of you probably want to dash to see Fiona's session, was a kind of early little bit of slice of LGBT history. Robinson noted that some of the female inmates took up what he described as odd fancies. Volatile, sometimes romantic relationships between female prisoners were actually very, very common. He described it as the odd fancies which one woman takes for another are still prevalent and are one of the chief causes of dispute and insubordination. Prison stiffs, i.e., communications of a loving tendency, which were folded up, pass from hand to hand till they reach the person for whom it is intended. An odd and ingenious are still the means by which they correspond. Failing ink or flyleaf from the library books, a woman will secure at times a scrap of brown paper from the workroom or elsewhere, and a prick with a pin on it, all that she has to communicate. Ingenuity can hardly go further. So I just thought that was very, very, very interesting, because the subtext here, obviously, is that female prison inmates were having romantic relationships with one another. Obviously referred to in the language of the day as odd fancies. This was the 1920s, so we've got to remember that it was the language of the day. And he also described that, it didn't always go smoothly. It led to a bit of aggro sometimes. He went on to describe it was not an uncommon experience for an aggrieved woman who had been presented with a lock of hair at some point. Sorry, I need to add the context here. He also went on, a lot of them met in the chapel. The chapel was where they could meet face to face and kind of bond, and it was a break in the daily monotony. But he also wrote that, as well as the stiffs, they had this thing called a lit language, which was a kind of prison code, a wordless language, a silent conversation, if you will, that these women were very adept at, that they could use to communicate. And the way he describes it, you can almost vividly imagine the scene. So he said it was no uncommon experience for an aggrieved woman who has been presented with a lock of hair at some point or other in her prison career to take this lock from her pocket, most frequently in church, so others could see, hold it up derisively to her who, in the first instance, had presented it, and affect to wipe her nose with it. Salt sprinkled on a lock of hair returned to the donor is always considered the most grievous and intolerable of insults, and it would lead to much extravagance of action, even to murder, should the chance present itself when the passions of these wild creatures were aroused. I just find that fascinating. That reminds you, and newspapers can transport you back in time, like you're there. So if you want to find out more, read the blog, check out our British Newspaper Archive blog. It's fascinating. There's thousands of maybe not thousands, hundreds of articles just as detailed and rich as that. So yeah, thank you for listening in. Before we go, we're going to have a quick look at some of the comments that have come through. Laurie McMahon-Hines, any chance to expand this program from another 30 minutes? I would love to. Unfortunately, I do have another meeting after this I'm meant to be at, which I'm already late for, but I enjoy these so much. I don't really care. I'll turn up late. But yeah, maybe we could look at doing longer form ones in the future. I'm just very pleased to hear you enjoy them. I certainly enjoy them. They're the highlight of my week. Great way to end. Repeating Linda's, we're going to do one on wacky crime and punishment. I promise you. Love that. Great suggestion. Andrew saying similar to the Wormwood Scrubs and the Woking Female Prison, Aussie goals were normally jails, whatever you want to say. I think it is jails, isn't it? I'm terrible at pronunciation. Aussie jails were normally built by the men transported there. Angela Weston Dunn has said, 1902, Ireland was still under English jurisdiction. My great-grandfather, James Dunn, who disappeared from 1901 and 1911 census, was found on the 1902 Kilmarnock jail records, which gave me the information that he was not living with his family, but also that he was born in Enniscorthy, Wexford. My first breakthrough from Dublin ancestors shows the power of crime, prisons, and punishment records. I mean, it depends how you react. I personally would love to find some examples of some naughty, less than law-abiding ancestors, provided they didn't do anything truly heinous, of course. But I think most people like to find a little bit of evidence of wrongdoing. It's interesting, isn't it? But if your ancestors are missing from the census, it's worth bearing in mind they could have fallen foul of the law, and they may be in prison. Just worth bearing in mind. Moore is saying, when I was a pre-nursing student, I worked at the Tyndall Hospital in Aylesbury, and opposite was Aylesbury Prison, where the great train rovers were house repaired. Oh wow! I wonder if they could see you from their cell windows. Probably not, actually, as they were. Probably in quite a secure cell. Brilliant. Well, I think just a few comments, people saying thank you, they've enjoyed it, lovely to see. Rita McClellan, it's Mother's Day in the US. Happy Mother's Day to all the wonderful mums who our mums who have been mums, who are with us, who are no longer with us. Nice point to end on. Careful what you wish for, Alex, from Linda. Brilliant. Well, I think there's loads more comments coming through. Great to see. We do read them all. I thoroughly enjoy these highlights of my week. I'm going to leave you all. Have a truly wonderful weekend. Keep researching. I hope you find, to all of you who are excited about the new Devon and Australian passenger lists, I hope you find something great. If you do, be sure to let us know. And actually, anybody who finds something great, send them in. We love hearing your stories. Please share. We love not just on Facebook Live. If you want to send something through long form, you may even be featured on our blog. If you're happy for us to, we could even try and get you in the papers. We're always on the hunt for stories, and we know just by seeing the comments that come through, so many of you have amazing ones, and you're finding new ones every single week. So yeah, get involved. Share your stories. And yeah, I am very late for my 6 minutes late for my new meeting now. So for my next meeting now. So I'm going to go. Wish you all a wonderful weekend. Happy Friday. Stay safe. Stay in touch. And I will see you all again in the not too distant future. Bye bye.